Welcome to this episode of A Facilitator's Journey. Today's guest is Chris Taylor from Actionable.io. Chris is someone I've just found in 2024. He's Canadian. He does two things that just fascinate me. One is he helps consultants, facilitators, trainers to create great businesses and how to connect with their clients effectively, to have great conversations, to demonstrate value, to genuinely be able to evolve and grow. Secondly, he is a geek when it comes to transfer of knowledge, transfer of learning and embedding. I'm gonna just flag this if you watch this. The video recording was going all over the place for me on my camera today, and the camera angle changes. If you're listening, I'm hoping you might just hear us giggling at times. I think I just need to name that. I don't know what's going on. It was fun. So, my lovely listeners, viewers, this is your invitation to go get a cuppa and pull up your seat next to me here on the pink chair and tune in your ears. Enjoy this episode. Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Kirsty. How are you?
Very good. Welcome to A Facilitator's Journey. So today, Chris, what are we going to talk about? What are some of the things that what are you known for in this world?
What am I known for? Great question. Within the world of facilitation, I would say there's two things I'm known for. One is not coming from the world of facilitation. So bringing all sorts of new language and slight tweaks to thinking to things that the industry has been doing for a long time. And then my obsession personally is what happens after a well-facilitated session and how do we as impact-focused facilitators ensure that participants are putting ideas into practice in a way that makes everybody look good.
Love it. God, he's good, guys. He's succinct. We're going to learn a lot from Chris today. Chris, I ask everybody this question. How do we know one another?
Through probably a connection of a connection of a connection. So I'm actually not. It was a Dr. Elena Schlatka that connected us originally, or where did we get connected through?
I feel like this is something I do very often is I stalk people on social media land, and I heard you on someone's podcast, on someone's live webinar.
Okay.
Or I heard you. Did you talk to Dr. Miriam Hadness on her podcast?
But she sounds lovely.
She's awesome. She's does loads of work with facilitators. I heard you speaking, and then I just followed that thread, and then I think I got on your email list, which is very good. People, you need to get on there because you give a lot. You're very generous with your thinking and sharing. But then you did a masterclass about 2 months ago, or a month ago that I joined.
Yeah, right. But yeah. I remember you being on the masterclass. You were very present. But I would have sworn that it was through a connection, but maybe you just showed up on my front porch one day and I thought, oh, she seems lovely. So we should chat.
The listeners and the viewers, because this goes out on YouTube as well, that they're used to me just tracking people down going, you're interesting. Let me talk to you.
Get over here.
Yeah. Come and talk to the SOF team. They want to know more. So, Chris, you've got a business called Actionable.
I do.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, actionable.co. If you Google Actionable and actionable.com pops up, it's very confusing because they're a wonderful group of humans out of California that have nothing to do with facilitation. But at first glance, you may think that they're a space. So we are actionable.co. And yeah, that's the long answer to the succinct question.
Brilliant. Interesting. My camera has just changed angle for sure. Yeah. I'm going to keep the sunshine on my face. Anyway, so you run a business called actionable.co.
Yes.
And the bit that I found very interesting about your business is, as you said at the beginning, you get very geeky about what happens after the training, after the facilitation. So I call that the embedding process.
Yeah.
Now, a facilitator's journey, though, is all about the business of running a business. So how did you get, because you said you're the least facilitatory trainer type individual. So how did you get here? Tell us your story.
It was a series of happy accidents over the course of 2 decades. The short version of this, I started in sales and direct sales, commission only sales. and I was really good at it, and I liked doing it. And so, as is often the case in those types of environments, when you're good at sales, they promote you out of sales into management, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously. And so I'm being a bit facetious, but it was a beautiful opportunity. And at 21 years of age, I was running a branch for this company in Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm Canadian, for those who didn't gather from the boots. Um, and so I was basically teaching 17 to 21-year olds how to sell knives, which if right, um, I know. So you talk about on a 100% commission based environment. So these are not salaried employees. They're not. So you can't tell them they have to be at training. Nor does that work. But at the time, it was like you can't use the stick. So it's got to be a bit of a carrot. So, it was a commission based environment. So they were showing up because they wanted to make more money. But what I became really obsessed with was the knowledge transfer. How did they put the learning into practice? And once you've learned about how to explain grade of steel, etc., most of what I was teaching and the stuff that I actually cared about was around empathy, around communication skills, around persuasion, around active listening. And I really fell in love with the nature of that work. So after that business, I wanted to go deeper on some of those subjects. I started reading a lot. And by a lot, I mean a lot. Like I was reading 4 or 5 business books a week. And absolutely nothing was changing in my life. And I had this sort of like the come to Jesus moment of what is going on here? I'm consuming all this content and nothing's changing for me. And then the proverbial sort of palm to forehead moment of, right, because you're not actually doing anything different. You're just consuming content. And that was the point. This is now about 18 years ago where I just said, I'm going to actually slow down my rate of consumption, because right now I've got a thimble that's already full and I'm just sloshing water over the top of it. And instead, I'm going to be deliberate about what I put into the thimble, and I'm going to apply it. I'm going to apply it. I'm going to apply it. And I became really obsessed with how you translate ideas into lasting action or behavior change. I'm skipping over the high level. We can go as deep as you want, but that attracted an audience. I grew a followership of about 30,000 people that were just really interested in this idea of converting ideas from popular business books. And that led to training requests, because people would take the work that I was publishing around ideas from books and how to put it into practice and say, that's great, but I need more meat on the bone. Can you come in and teach this to my team? And so through this happy coincidence, I ended up running a small training company out of Toronto, Canada. Loved it. And realized that the same issue that I was having around transferring ideas into action was, sort of ever more so in the training room. And I could get, 5 out of 5 feedback scores and nothing changed for the participants. So I, again, became really obsessed with how do we help learners put ideas into practice.
And actually, so some people might be going, I'm a coach, I don't do training. I'm a facilitator, I don't do training. I think what you're talking about, though, is still relevant, because to us as business owners, I will absolutely guarantee everyone listening to this has been through some sort of learning for themselves and
Sure.
then gone, why is nothing changing?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't change. We don't put, as you say, put what we've learned into action, or the podcast we've just heard, or the book we've just read. Why don't people change? Like, why don't we put things in? What have you discovered? Like, why we don't put things into action?
So I'll start by saying I don't think there's anything new under the sun. There's a tremendous amount of research out there that I've built upon, and then through the actual platform, we validated and put our own language around. But this is human nature. I don't think this has changed in 10,000 years. Ultimately, for us to change as humans, we really need 3 things, right? We need to know how to change. So that's the quote unquote training or coaching or the new ideas standpoint. So we need to know how. We need to have a strong enough reason why we want to change. So that's the heartfelt stuff. And then the third piece that so often gets missed is that we need a path to realize that change. Because what so often happens, we go to training, great. A good facilitator, a good coach, a good trainer, the reason why they get paid what they do, or what they should, is because they're really good at both of those first 2 things, right? They can transfer information, but they do it in a way that helps people find the so what for them. And then people leave the room. And the hard work of actually putting the ideas into practice doesn't happen in a vacuum. And again, none of this is all perfectly logical, right? But they're busy. It's not like they're sitting around going, I have 2 hours to work on a new habit today. How am I going to do that? Right? We're trying to slot it in amongst the busyness and demands of people around us on our lives. And so that's so often where things fall down, is that we haven't laid out a clear path with the appropriate levers to keep us on track towards the change that we want to realize. And that's been the focus of my work, has been helping facilitators ensure that they are hitting both those sides of the how and the why.
Yeah.
But then how do you support people once they leave? Wow.
And I think the same is true for all of us in the business world, or running our businesses as facilitators and trainers. A bit meta, this conversation. Stay with us, team. Because I think a lot of us in this world, we're avid learners. We want to learn, we want to grow, we want to develop. So we have that need to know. We then probably have the heart to change, but there's sometimes still like, what path do I take? And it's interesting. I was talking to some people yesterday, and they were like, you get these the templates or the blueprint from big people going, do it my way, you're going to be absolutely fine. But actually, it's not true. That doesn't work either. So it's to your point, like, show me that, but then let me find my way to work out what it is I need to be doing. God, I love this stuff. So have you read, like, I read and I really loved it. Is it The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg?
Yeah.
And just knowing what are the triggers that cause you to have a habit, good or bad.
Yeah.
And if you can identify the trigger, sometimes that's the bit to change. Because then you get the habit and the reward.
It's the two big things that people often miss. One is the trigger, for sure. And I really appreciate Duhigg popularized it. It's really interesting. So when I was reading 4 or 5 books a week, to figure out what to read next, I would go to the appendix and find out who the influencers were on the book that I just read, if I liked the book. And I ended up on this, sort of scavenger hunt of authors throughout time. And when I came across The Power of Habit, BJ Fogg is quoted about 1,000 times in the appendix, because most of the research that Duhigg and James Clear and Katie Milkman and really anyone that's used the word habits in the title of their book in the last 15 years, a huge percentage of that research is based on BJ Fogg's work out of Stanford. But I digress.
No, it's good. I love it.
The two key pieces that are often missed or misunderstood. One is the trigger, because what most of us don't think about, ironically, is that most of our life is on autopilot, right? We're engaged in unconscious patterns of behavior. And in order to engage in a new behavior that's not yet established, we need to effectively wake our brain up to the fact that something new is supposed to happen. And so the idea of identifying the trigger where the new behavior is supposed to happen needs to be as vivid and visceral as possible. So it's not when I'm in a challenging conversation, I'll do this thing. That's hard for us to point at. Like, we can point historically, but in the moment, it's going to be hard to recognize that we're in it. So instead, it's things like, as specific as possible. When my key goes in the door to come home at the end of the day, it's like, I know what my door looks like. I know what my key feels like. I know what that sounds like as it goes in. That's a trigger that wakes up our brain enough to go, something's supposed to happen. And then what we want to do is insert what BJ Fogg calls the laughably small next step, the laughably small habit. Way too often, that new habit that we're trying to insert is either too vague or too big, or too irregular, which we can come back to. But the too vague and too big, we want it to be something that is definitively yes or no. I did it or I didn't. Not, I will be more present in the conversation, because what is that? Was I or was I not? It's not absolute, right?
Triggers are important because they trigger the habit. What do we then need to do to, like, you do the habit, but you change it and then you embed the new behavior? Like, what needs to happen?
What needs to happen? So I think it's good to start from appreciating that the reason most of our life is run on autopilot is actually to protect our brain from overheating, like literally, right? So it's a self-preservation mechanism where we don't have to be consciously aware of everything that we're doing all the time. But what that means is that when we're creating the new habit, we have the trigger to interrupt, to wake up, and then we need to create a gap before we re-engage in the pre-existing unconscious behaviors. So we talk about this through the lens of the trigger. That's that visceral, I put my key in the lock, and then acknowledging the current habit. Now, a lot of people get this wrong because they try to change two habits at once unintentionally. They try to engage in a new habit while simultaneously ceasing a previous habit. And so what we want to do instead is just acknowledge the pre-existing habit. So, to get very real, I used to be substantially overweight and I wanted to get into better shape. And, physical habits is something everyone can relate to. It's one of the reasons why we use it. And so the habit that I created was when I crossed the threshold into my bathroom in the morning, which again, visceral, I can feel the tile under my feet. I know what that lighting's like. I know the whole thing. It's a physical spot. So when I cross the threshold into my bathroom every morning, instead of immediately brushing my teeth, which again, not a bad habit, I'm going to brush my teeth. But before I engage, I haven't brushed my teeth in 6 years. Before we engage in that pre-existing habit, I'm creating the space and saying something new can happen here. So it's almost like a double interrupt for our brain. So it says, right, okay, something new. Then what we need to, and I use that word very sparingly, but if we want to increase the likelihood of change happening, we need to make it laughably small. And I'm pretty sure that's language I borrowed from BJ Fogg, but it's got to be something, my language, that's easier just to do than it is to justify not doing. So for example, when I cross the threshold in my bathroom each morning, instead of immediately brushing my teeth, I will do one push-up.
Right.
It's laughably small. It's really hard to justify not doing one push-up, right? And then, of course, once you're down there and you've started, certainly in my condition at the time, it was easier just to keep going than it was to actually get back up again. But the same is true for, you decide you want to be a runner. You and I were talking about running before, and I don't run. It's not, I will go for a 5K run every morning. It's like, no, you won't. But you can do, when I walk down the stairs to my office, instead of entering my office, I will put on my left shoe. Laughably small. Once the left shoe's on, it's easy just to put on the right shoe. This all stemmed from, we know what we need to do most of the time. And that's true of your participants as well, your coachees, your facilitated group. They, in many cases, know what they need to do. And if they didn't, then your time with them has helped them crystallize that. It's helped them connect to their why. Now, as they go to leave the room, before they leave, what we have found to be extremely effective is to spend 15 minutes. And you, the audience, are probably already doing a version of this around, what mattered to you? How are you going to apply it? How are you going to keep on track? And it's great to ask those questions. It's even more helpful when we give them a structure or a frame for it. So the format that I was just laying out with the trigger, the current habit, the new habit, I first heard about it from Michael Bungay Stanier in his book, The Coaching Habit, where he refers to this as the new habit formula. And those are 3 of the 4 components of setting ourselves up to have a clear path leaving the room around how we are going to engage in change. There's 2 other components to it that are worth mentioning. One being to really spell out for yourself the why. So often when we're in the sort of professionally managed bubble of a coaching conversation or facilitated session or training room, we feel the why. It's a very like visceral sense. We feel it internally, but if we haven't articulated it, it can fade really quickly. So to actually write out, and that matters because, and then the answer to that question or that sentence, becomes an anchor that we can often sort of imbue with emotion and we can come back to. So if you're able to revisit that why for that commitment, we're more likely to stick with it. This is intrinsic motivation, right? This is the purpose behind the work that we do. The other elements of intrinsic motivation, autonomy and mastery, we're getting deep into this. Is this where you want to go, Kirsty? Because I could spend another 20 minutes here. Okay.
Well, just some headlines for people as to what they can do to, like, if they've been learning something new and they're finding it hard to do it. So they've got to define their why, identify the trigger, identify a very simple, one laughable, easy step that they can do. They need to be explicit as to why they're doing. And for me, that's taking us into our space of our values. Like, why is that important to me? So like, if I feel like it's intrinsically important that I understand the finances in my business, that I can utilize social media in a more effective way, or I understand how to have great conversations with my customers, my clients, I
Yep.
am more likely to do it.
Yes. And we're also fairly rubbish as a species on sticking with commitments to ourselves.
Uh-huh.
But if we anchor that to other people, we're much more likely to stick with it. Now, we'll talk about accountability in a second, but what I'm really talking about here, and let's use those two examples. I want to understand the finances of my business because it's the right thing to do, and I want to be a responsible business owner. We got a lot of head stuff happening. But
Yeah.
if we move that to because that means that I'll better be able to provide for my family, and that
Hmm.
matters because I want to set my kids up for their
Yeah.
next level of success, that has a much deeper head to heart move that has us going, shit, yeah, that's why I care. That's why this matters. This
Yeah.
cerebral thing actually emotionally connects. Same thing with social media, right? It's like I want to because I want to be more proactive on social media. We don't actually want to, a lot of us, right? Particularly those of us that like doing the work. We don't want to be self-promoting, all that. And
Yeah.
so we can tell ourselves that, but when push comes to shove later on, we're going to go, I don't really want to. And we tend to avoid pain, right? As a species. And so even if it's imagined pain, we tend to avoid it. So what's the shift? I want to share on social media because there's a lot more people that are going to be positively impacted by my free stuff than by working with me through a paid relationship. And I want to make a dent on the universe. I want to help people get unstuck around topic XYZ. If we can connect to that deeper, to your point, values or purpose and link the activity to that, we're going to be much more likely to stick with it. So the practical exercise here is after you've drafted the and that matters because, then you can keep going with and that matters because, and that matters because. And within 2 or 3 or 4 layers, you will get to a place of deep personal resonance with that commitment, something that is way deeper than the tactic that you are committing to.
So we talked about habits and the why habits are important for us, even as business owners, let alone helping our people in the world of training change our
Yeah.
habits. One of the things I've said to you before is you talk to people as if they're consultants, and I know
Mm-hmm.
you have a predominantly Canadian American, and I know you have European and UK audience, but the language of being a consultant can feel quite alien to my ears because I'm like, no, I'm a trainer, a facilitator.
Yep.
Can you talk to what's the benefit of calling ourselves consultants, or why consultants?
I think the core of this, and it's funny because I hadn't explicitly thought about it until you asked me the question a couple weeks ago, and I've been thinking a lot about it since. This is going to get a bit existential for a second. But I'm speaking to the audience now. In the work that you do, whether the activity is coaching, consulting, facilitating, training, whatever the tactics are, why are you doing it? Because the answer to that question to me tends to fall into one of two camps. It's either to create an exceptional experience for the people in front of you while you're in front of them, or it's to drive impact for the individuals in the organization, to facilitate change so that they come out the other side different than they
Mm-hmm.
went in. And what I've found is that mindset between whether it's around what happens in the room or whether it's around the outcome of what happens in the room tends to align with the objectives of either the HR, learning and development OD department, or a business leadership function or the executive team inside an organization. And executives don't typically spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on coaches, facilitators, or trainers, but they spend millions of dollars or pounds or euros or wherever you happen to be listening on consultants because they, rightly or wrongly, whether we like it or not, the idea of consulting is aligned to the strategic priorities of the client organization. It's around moving something related to the business objectives forward. Facilitation, coaching, training is people centric. And this I believe is wrong, that doesn't directly connect to the strategic priorities of the organization in a lot of executives' minds. And a lot of this is subconscious. Like if you ask them explicitly, they'd say, no, developing our people is our number one priority. Sure, but show me that with how you're spending your money, and I'll call nonsense on that, because they're spending way more on consulting. So I don't encourage people to call themselves consultants, but what I do encourage anyone who's in the people development space is to start to mentally reframe the work you do to this being about advancing the strategic priorities of the organization through and with the development of the people inside the organization. I do feel the need to put a caveat on it that I am not suggesting for a second that the priorities of the organization are more important than the development of the human beings. Quite the contrary. And you will have a much easier time securing budget to develop the people inside the organization if you can show out of the gate how you're advancing the strategic priorities of the organization.
Yeah. It all interlinks. But I think that's really interesting what you said, that, and it really resonates, that businesses, they hear the language of a facilitator or a trainer and it sits in there, oh, that's learning, that's HR, potentially. Whereas if they have consultants coming in, that's about transformation and change. But that is what a trainer and a facilitator does. We just name it what it is.
100%. And just before we move on from that point, I don't mean to villainize the executive. If you think about the people leading profit and loss, P&L's functions within an organization, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization and to their own bonuses to make wise investments with the dollars on behalf of the organization. And they're also incredibly time starved, and they're not usually the ones in your sessions. So if you can save them time by connecting the dots for them and show them how developing their people is a direct lever to improve or achieve their strategic priorities, you make life easier for them.
Yes.
They're not bad people. They have a responsibility to invest wisely. So help show them that it's a wise investment.
And I think that's part of writing a good proposal. And when you're in that conversation with the key decision maker, it might not be that first conversation you're having I call it like that sort of initial contact conversation, but you're trying to work out. I always say to people, like, listen for what does it do for the organization? What does it do for the participant, the learner? And often the client will talk from one of those two positions. And if, say, the client always talks from the position of the participant, I'll always be like, so what will that do for your organization? How will this learning here or this activity support the change in your business? And the vice versa. If they would say, well, we've got to do this from the business point of view, I'm like, okay, and what will that do for the participant? Like, what's in it? It's like, what's in it for me? What's in it for the organization? And you've got to come from both perspectives.
Yeah. Well, in particular, when we consider, I was reading something recently that said that the average buying committee on an L&D program is 6.2 people. So I don't know who 6.2 is, but I know. And we don't interact with that whole group.
No.
Right? We're interacting with our key buyer. And if we're interacting with someone in L&D or HR, then their natural leaning will be towards the people development side of it. Right. And so we're at risk of skewing our proposal to meet the needs of the human that we're in front of, not appreciating the large buying group behind them that we may never have a chance to interact with. And the proposal is the thing, right? That's going to be the talking point around who they decide to go with.
And I could go down a rabbit hole now about how do you write, what are the ingredients of a great proposal? How do you even get there? But I feel like that's probably another conversation for another time. Because I get very excited. But I love having those first conversations with customers. I find it fascinating. I love listening to what their problems are and asking them lots of questions and just listen. You've got to be in listening mode at that point, haven't you? I think it's when people go, oh, come and pitch your idea. I was like, well, I can't pitch anything to you because I don't know what you need.
Exactly. I've been following a woman named Jen. Her sort of nickname on LinkedIn is Demand Jen. And I can't remember her last name, but if you search Demand Jen, Jen. But she talks about entering the conversation with a hypothesis. So what you just described, right, of refusing to pitch until we've actually done some discovery, 100%. To me, that we need to be at that level. And if we're strictly asking questions and they're talking to other vendors, they're going to answer our questions with the same answers they answer their questions. right? Like if right, and so what we can do to actually break that paradigm right out of the gate is to identify a hypothesis ahead of time by doing a little bit of research around what the strategic priorities are of the organization. So if it's a publicly traded company, you can search for letters from the CEO. If it's a private company, you can search for podcast interviews with the founder. And if you've identified what their strategic priorities are, you can come with a hypothesis of, so hey, it looks like next year you're rolling out this merger with company XYZ, and you've asked me to come in and quote on a leadership alignment program or whatever. I'm guessing that's because you want to make sure that the culture change is smooth and that you're retaining top talent. But that's from an outside perspective. What have I missed?
Nice. Oh, I love that.
Right? I know Jen's brilliant. And what I love about it is that you don't have to be anywhere near the mark. You could be totally off the mark, right? And but it's just open to totally different. It does two things. One, it differentiates you from the other vendors that they're talking to, and two, it anchors to the strategic priorities right out of the gate in saying, I'm here to focus on this. At which point you're going to get one of two reactions. You're either going to get somebody who is in the know on the strategic priorities and they're going to correct you, or you're going to go down that path, or you're going to get a bit of a deer in headlights look from your junior L&D buyer who has no idea. They've just been tasked with finding a leadership coach. And this to me is this golden opportunity to help them level up their own brand inside their organization by equipping them with questions to go back to their boss that show that they are taking the strategic priorities seriously.
And it makes you're on their side by helping them do that. And then I go the next step in that same conversation. So I love that. So do some homework beforehand, figure out their strategic priorities, put some questions in there, done your homework. It does look good. It does make things, as you say, it allows you to anchor and talk strategic priorities. Then what I do is I go through the questions, I summarize, and then I do add a flavor of my headline thinking. So I'm not giving them the whole solution, but I'm going, I'm sensing at this point, this could be useful, or maybe you'd go down this route. There's always discovery, there's design, there's delivery, there's embed. I need another D. And then I always leave with a question of, so what's the next logical step from your point of view? More often than not, the client says, can you write up your ideas and put it into a proposal and let us see your some ideas in your costings? And I'll be like, okay. And then you do the other classic questions. What's your budget? How long have you got? And I always ask, who else are you talking to? Because I want to know if I'm in a beauty parade and I'm just being used as a and if I don't know them and they've just done a cold call to me, I'm like, can I just sense check? Are you using me just for numbers against maybe a preferred supplier? Because it'll really change how much time and effort I put into the proposal. Be really blunt. And I say that to them and they're like, or sometimes they're like, no, you're the only person I'm talking to. So I'm like, okay.
I also, wherever possible, I won't share the proposal via email. It's got to be in a call, right? So we're going to walk through it together on a call.
What does that do?
It does a couple things. One, if they are just tire kicking, then they'll blow you off. And secondly, if they're serious about it, then the follow-up question is, great. And I appreciate that you're doing all the legwork here, but you're not making this decision in a vacuum. So who else should be on that call in order to bring their questions forward?
I've got other friends who send the proposal, but with a Loom video or a Zoom video that talks through the proposal, which then they say it can get shared on with other people around the business. So help them make that decision.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just always volunteer to record that meeting so that they can share that afterwards as well. But one of the key things, so again, I used to be a sales trainer, right? That's my background. Yeah. There needs to be a clear and agreed to next step before we get off the call every time. And it's got a date and it's got a reconnection point on it so that if they end up ghosting you, they've broken their commitment to you.
Oh my God. Big bugbear of mine. And
that's ridiculous.
A lot of people are like, oh, but can you ask for that? Can you say that? And I'm like, I've come to the point, yes, you can, because there's nothing more frustrating than being ghosted and like feeling like your proposal's fallen into the pit to their email junk, or it's horrible.
it's the, you know, it's the overused cliche, but the way that you're treated during the dating process is the way magnified you're going to be treated in the marriage. And so if we're going to go into a multi-month relationship or multi-year relationship developing your people, I don't want to be your order taker. I don't want to be, you know, at your whim. That's not going to get you my best work. And so we just, again, I'm not being a jerk about it. We just need to come into this as high functioning adults and
Yeah.
agree that these are the next steps, right?
Yeah.
And if they're not into that, then honestly, and I appreciate that if someone's sitting here, you know, with a gap in their calendar and just really wanting to land some business, this is hard to do. I fully acknowledge that. And call it karmic intervention or whatever you want. But I find that when you say no to a client that's not going to be a good client, you know, you're rewarded with the dream client that comes next.
Can we
I've been
have
around this long enough to see that.
whatever you need to say, a Hail Mary, a hallelujah to that, because it is so
Exactly.
true. And I've been talking to a lot of people. Right now, we're recording in November 24, and this will come out in 25. And times are tough here. And I don't know what it's like in Canada, but a lot of us have got gaps in the diary. Business has slowed down. And people are, it is for some people it's worrying times because they're so new to world, or they've been going for
Yep.
3-4 years, but it's still what I call like the cash flow hasn't smoothed out yet. So there isn't just that pot of money that, you know, on the quieter times you can still pay yourself, and whilst you're doing some inner work or you're building on the business or you're working with finding new clients. And so some people are really challenged at this point. But I am with you that if you say no to one thing, something else does show up. But then you've got to have that resilience and that inner
Yeah.
grit to hold
What a
it.
lot of people don't realize if they haven't said no to bad business is that when you say no to a willing client, your sales resolve goes through the roof. What I mean by that is if you've had the confidence to say no to someone who's not a good fit, your confidence when you're speaking to someone who is a good fit is going to be palpable. You can't fake it. It's an integrity piece, but it's a proven integrity piece. Like, you know, for yourself that you are encouraging this not because you want their money, although you definitely want their money, but because you have confidence that you can help and that it'll be a good fit for both of you.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Couple more questions. We
Yeah.
were talking about problems in the business of running a business.
Sure.
And when we spoke, you split it like sub $0.5 million, which is
Yep.
probably about 300 million UK, and then plus 500,000.
Yep.
What are some of the problems that businesses have, like and it's interesting that you differentiate it on a financial number, but can you just share some of your noticings?
Yeah. I think
You
there's,
don't
there's a
have to
couple
you
key
don't have to
milestones.
give the you don't have to give the answers of how we resolve them, because those are big challenges in some instances. So but what are some of
Yeah.
those challenges?
Yeah, we'll just get everybody really nervous and then we'll end the conversation. That'll
Yeah,
be good.
we're not going to help you
The,
guys.
so look, when you're running a service-based business, in my experience, regardless of what market, well, if you're in a sort of a, you know, a premium economy, so in dollars or pounds or euros, there tends to be some very natural stuck points. The first point is getting to 120, the equivalent of 10K a month. You know, depending on what you're charging for your facilitation, this is really around reps. Are you getting enough days on site, enough experiences? And it's largely solved by lots of conversation, right? Fairly straightforward, but whatever it takes, being at networking events, engaging people on social media, connecting with friends of friends, asking for referrals. It's the basic stuff, but you just need conversation volume.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of people I talk to that are stuck at like 80 or 100K. And they're like, I just can't figure out how to move beyond. So how many conversations with new contacts have you had this week? Like this week? I don't know, probably like 2 this month. Right. Well, that potentially is a problem. So that's a stuck point. Once you get through that stuck point, then the next natural stuck point is where you're on this feast or famine. And you sort of alluded to this already, but you've got sales conversations when you've got sales conversations. Then you sign the contract, you sort of unintentionally put all of that down. You do the delivery work. So my 4Ds are discovery, design, deploy, and debrief. Those are my 4. So you're welcome to them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And for anyone listening, if you're curious to go deeper, I do regular live free training on the 4D model.
Get on it, everybody. Go see Chris. He's awesome. And he's
That's the one.
really nifty with multiple cameras, which my system is not today. If you're watching this, my camera changes direction every 20 minutes.
You have two cameras. You just don't have
Yeah.
control. That's right. And so it's the feast or famine roller coaster. I land the gig, I deliver the gig, I get great feedback, and then my pipeline's empty and I need to go back and do the next thing. So that will typically take people up to about that 300 to 500K range, depending on what they're charging for their day rate. Once you've worked the system to have regular lead flow and regular sales conversation and regular delivery, you start to smooth out those revenue gaps. And you can usually grow, again, depending on sector and depending on expertise, to somewhere between 650 and $1 million.
Okay.
And you can do that with a small admin team, a little bit of marketing support, and you doing all of the delivery. That's where most people, and it's a great life at that point. You're busy, but you've got a great income, you're making a difference, you've got a good brand in the market, and a lot of people stop there. And there's nothing wrong with that. Getting beyond that sort of 1,800,000 to 1.2 range, in my experience, is typically where we need to start looking at scaling the business. And I don't mean scale like the scale bros out of Silicon Valley. What I'm talking about is the systematically buying back your time, where you're replacing the lower value tasks and really making sure that you are doing the work that only you can do. There's an ego check at that point that's required, because there's a lot of stuff that you think only you can do that's absolutely not true. I got stuck there for, 5-6 years because I was like, well, I couldn't possibly hand this off. No one could do it like me. Right, that's fine. They can do it like them and do it as effectively, or in many cases more so. But just to finish the chain, that tends to take you to about 3 million. There's another major turning point at that where you're getting out of leadership roles. And then the next point is really 10 million. Those are the major growth points.
Wow. Interesting. But it's really useful to hear that there are sort of those, there's stepping stones, and what some, especially I think for our listeners, we sit down to those first 2 levels up to 10K a month, and then the challenges of still going. And I think it's that smoothing out of the feast or famine. Have I got enough leads coming through? How do I find those leads?
Yeah.
And people sort of struggle in that space. But it's a consistent thing. And for those listening who've got this far, I would thoroughly recommend finding Chris on LinkedIn and signing up to his newsletter, because that's one of the ways I've been learning, is by I caught a LinkedIn Live with somebody this summer, and that's how I found you. And then I came on one of your free webinars, which I just found about embedding learning and transferring of knowledge. Okay, wow. Oh, there's so much going on. My brain's like, I want to ask this question, I want to ask that question. However, I'm going to go to and ask you the quick fire questions.
Sounds great.
What advice would you give to someone starting out in this world?
Embrace the Stockdale paradox.
And what is the Stockdale paradox?
So this comes from Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, or at least that's where I was first exposed to it. The Stockdale paradox is the mindset or ability to stay firmly planted in the present while also clearly envisioning the future. Where a lot of folks, in my experience, get stuck starting out is myopically focusing on today or this week and losing sight of the bigger picture around where they're going. Or conversely, living in the clouds, focused entirely on what they're building and not at all focused on what they're doing today. And the ability to be, an old manager of mine used to call it pleasantly dissatisfied with where things are at right now. Right? Pleasantly dissatisfied, where we can be happy in the progress that we're making while still aspiring to more. How does this look? If I'm costing something out and I know that I have the capability to grow into a 300-pound an hour coach or whatever, but right now I don't have any clients, so I'm starting and I'm going to charge $50 or whatever. That's okay. You can say, this coaching will be $300 an hour. Right now, for my first 30 clients, I'm doing it for $50 an hour or whatever. That's an example of living in both realities. As long as it feels real to you, it's valuable to share it with people. And there's other examples too, but that would be my short answer to the question. Embrace the Stockdale paradox.
I love that. Next question. Who do you follow in social media land that you think others should know about?
Kirsty Lewis. Absolutely. I've got a slightly different answer to this, but build a virtual board of advisors. This is my advice. There's lots of great people you can follow within the industry, but it's almost like getting your PhD, where you have this exceptionally deep subject matter expertise that matters to very little of the population, right? But instead, I've really deliberately cultivated, I mentioned demand gen, marketing people, sales people, design people, ops and admin, finance, AI, stuff that the beautiful thing about social is that you can, like Kirsty, you can stalk people without actually, you don't have to come out of the shadows. So for you to follow some people that are outside of your comfort zone or your expertise and really curating that list, so you're actually learning from them regularly, that's been one of the best ways to grow. I love the theme of this podcast, Kirsty, because it's around the business of building a facilitation practice. And business is not all about the thing we do. In fact, as you grow, it becomes less and less about the thing you do and more about, right? So follow those people. So some examples, I mentioned Jen. Nate Nasrallah is a guy who's brilliant when it comes to how to ensure that your clients are talking positively about you when you're not in the room, basically in the sales process. So I follow Nate. I follow a guy named Matt Verlack, who's a finance geek, and his stuff around ops and finance is really good, and a couple others. Or just come join me on LinkedIn. Follow me, and then follow some of the people I follow.
Final question. How have you invested in yourself or your business to support you in moving forward?
I spend almost $100,000 a year on mastermind groups,
right,
and key events. To be crystal clear, I value my time with my family above all other things and about 3 layers above all other things. So I'm extremely discerning about how often I leave and where I go. So it's not about volume. It's about the highest caliber that I can afford that will let me in the door, and reassessing that every couple of years. But one of the groups that I joined a few years ago, I felt like a real imposter. The leaders in those businesses were running 8 or 9 figure businesses. They were like, they're household names. They're people that you see on TV. They're subject matter experts brought into them. And when I joined that group, it was one of the first times that I'd really felt imposter syndrome in a real way. I think, and look, this is a whole other conversation, but as a white male growing up in a upper middle class, I had a whole lot of privilege that I didn't appreciate early in life. And so I appreciate that my travel is not like other people's, and many people experience imposter syndrome much earlier in their life, amongst many other things. I've come to appreciate that imposter syndrome is an indication that you're in the right room. Imposter syndrome is an indication that there's things about the people that you're now surrounded by that you aspire to but haven't reached yet. And as long as we believe in the inherent goodness of humans, those environments are specifically designed to facilitate those opportunities to connect with and learn from those people. And I guarantee you, every one of you listening, that you have something unique to offer based on your own experience and your own travels, and looking for the opportunity to be of service to that group, rather than going in this inward spiral of I'm not worthy, and what if I say something stupid and all of that. If we show up to serve, even if the opportunity to serve is 1% compared to everything we can gain, we will make friends in those groups, we'll build relationships, and we will grow faster than anywhere else.
Brilliant. Gosh, you've made me think for sure. Chris, thank you so much for today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to more conversations, doing another podcast with you in 2025 where we don't have weirdness going with my computer and the camera. How do people find you in this world? Where can they go to stalk you and to get to know what you do?
So for social media wise, I'm by far the most active on LinkedIn. So you can check me out there. It's Chris Taylor. There's a lot of Chris Taylors. So Chris Taylor at
Well,
Action.
right, we'll get the right link in the show notes for sure.
Perfect. For anyone that wants to go deeper into how to actually, as a facilitator, consultant, coach, trainer, how to make learning stick, we have a free training. It's really sort of the 20% that gets you 80% of the results. And that's at actionable.scoreapp.com. It'll take you into a 13 question self-assessment, and then it'll take you into the training based on the specific area of those 4Ds. How do you engage in discovery in a way that showcases your focus on impact? How do you design for it? How do you deploy? How do you tell that impact story? So that would be a great resource for folks as well.
Thank you. So LinkedIn, and then also if you find Chris's website, you can sign up to the newsletter, which always tells stories. But it's Pam or Fred or Jack, what they've been up to. I'm like, oh, what's happened this week?
So it's a little novella. That's great.
I love it. Thank you for being here. And if you've got this far listening, thank you for joining us today. Wow, what a conversation with Chris. Apologies if you hear us giggling all the way through that. As I said at the beginning, we had some issues with Kirsty's camera. What I find really fascinating with Chris is he's a complete geek, and I think he'll be okay with me saying that. He really dives deeply into his subjects. He really understands what it takes to embed learning, transfer knowledge. He knows the psychology as well as the logical steps. He has an amazing app and tool that helps you track and measure how learning is being transferred. I love the fact that he thinks about our proposals and how we talk to our clients from a strategic point of view. It's the bigger picture. It's not just about that one project. It's like asking those questions around how is what I am doing impacting your business? But then the fact that he's saying, go and do your homework, go and seek out a business's strategic priorities. I'd just forgotten to do that. That was a massive aha and learning for me. If you are listening and wondering how you can stay connected with me, with School of Facilitation, the invitation is go find me on LinkedIn, go find me on Instagram, LinkedIn Kirsty Lewis, Instagram School of Facilitation. Come and join the SOF Collective on WhatsApp. It's a free community group. And maybe some of you are going to join us in the field in June for SOFest Edition 1. So if this is your first time hearing about SOFest is going to be a festival for 100 plus facilitation trainers, 10th to the 12th of June in the UK. It's a mix of glamping, nature, speakers, workshops. It's a space for you to connect, learn and share. It's a space for you to resource yourself and rejuvenate. So go check out the website. Thank you for being here. Please give us a like. Please give us some love, a comment, please. And share this. Share the podcast with people you know who also may find this of interest. Thank you for listening. See you again in a couple of weeks' time.